The last thing I saw was fire, not the gentle flicker of candlelight or the warm glow of a hearth, but the brilliant, searing white of an IED detonating 3 feet from my face. That was Afghanistan 2021. That was the end of seeing Sarah's smile when I walked through our front door. My name is Marcus Chin and I'm 34 years old. I spent 2 tours in Afghanistan as a combat engineer with the Army Corps, defusing bombs and clearing routes for supply convoys. I was good at my job, had steady hands, and the kind of methodical patience that kept me alive when other soldiers' luck ran out. The irony wasn't lost on me that the very thing I'd spent years dismantling was what finally got me. I've been home for 8 months now. Home, that's what everyone calls it, but it doesn't feel like home when you can't navigate your own hallway without running into the wall, when you can't see your wife's face, when every familiar sound becomes a potential threat in the darkness that has become your entire world. Sarah still lives here, of course. This is her house too, the little 2-bedroom ranch we bought 3 years ago when I was between deployments. But we exist in separate orbits now, 2 people sharing the same space but living entirely different lives. She leaves for her job at the elementary school at 7:30 each morning. I hear her keys jingling, her footsteps on the hardwood, the soft click of the front door closing. She returns around 4, and I hear her again, grocery bags rustling, the refrigerator opening and closing, the quiet sounds of dinner being prepared. We don't talk. Not really, not about anything that matters. What we do instead is this strange dance of avoidance. She leaves my meals on the kitchen counter, always in the same spot so I can find them. She does my laundry and leaves clean clothes folded on the dresser. She pays the bills, handles the insurance calls, deals with the VA paperwork that arrives in thick manila envelopes. She takes care of everything and I let her because what else can I do? The worst part isn't the blindness itself, it's the shame that comes with it. I used to be the one who took care of things. I fixed the leaky faucet and changed the oil in our cars and carried the heavy groceries up from the car. I was the husband who deployed overseas to serve his country, who came home with stories and souvenirs and plans for our future. Now I'm the husband who sits in the living room all day listening to audiobooks and trying not to knock over the coffee table. The phone sits on the end table beside my chair now, the blue recliner that Sarah bought specifically for me after I came home. It's positioned so I can reach everything I need. The remote for the TV I can't see, a glass of water that I refill by counting steps to the kitchen sink, and the phone that reads me Sarah's text messages. She texts me every day, has been texting me every day since I've been home, even though I've never once replied. Even though we barely speak to each other anymore. Even though I've made it clear through my silence that I don't want to engage, don't want her pity, don't want her careful kindness that feels more like obligation than love. Every morning around 10 after she's been at work for a few hours, the phone buzzes with her first message of the day. I've memorized the sound of the text-to-speech function, that flat robotic voice that turns her words into something mechanical and impersonal. But somehow, impossibly, I can still hear her voice underneath it all. I know which messages she sent during her lunch break because they're longer and more thoughtful. I know which ones she sent while walking to her car after school because they're shorter, more rushed. I know which ones she sent late at night because they carry a different weight, a loneliness that matches my own. The messages themselves are mundane, the kind of small talk that married couples share throughout the day. Stopped by the grocery store. They have those apples you like on sale. Mrs. Patterson asked about you today. Told her you were doing well. Made your favorite chicken tonight. It's in the fridge if you want to heat it up later. Sometimes she sends longer messages, updates about her students or stories about her sister or memories of things we used to do together. Remember when we went to that little diner in Colorado Springs and you insisted on ordering the biggest breakfast they had? You could barely finish half of it. Drove past the lake today. The leaves are changing. You always said fall was your favorite season there. I listen to every message. I tell myself I'm going to stop, that I'm going to ask her to stop sending them, but I never do. Instead, I find myself waiting for that familiar buzz, that robotic voice delivering her words to me like some strange daily communion. The truth is, those messages are the only connection I have left to the person I used to be, to the marriage we used to have. In her words, I can still glimpse the woman who fell in love with a soldier, who waited through 2 deployments, who believed we could build something lasting together. In her words, I can remember what it felt like to be part of something bigger than my own broken self. But I can't bring myself to respond. What would I say? How do you text back when you can't see the keyboard, when every word takes 5 times longer to type than it used to, when you're not even sure what you want to say anymore? How do you maintain a conversation when you're no longer the person the other person fell in love with? So I listen and I don't reply, and we continue this one-sided correspondence that has become the strangest form of marriage I've ever experienced. The days blur together when you can't see the sun rise or set. Time becomes something you measure in routine, the sound of Sarah leaving for work, the delivery truck that comes every Tuesday, the neighbor's dog that barks at exactly 5:30 every evening. I've learned to navigate by sound and touch and memory, but it's exhausting in a way I never anticipated. Everything takes longer, everything requires more concentration, and by the end of each day I'm drained from the simple effort of existing in a world I can no longer see. The hardest part's the isolation. Not just the physical isolation, though that's real enough, but the emotional distance I've created between myself and everyone who cares about me. My mother calls twice a week and I let it go to voicemail. My buddies from the unit send messages through Facebook and I ignore them. Sarah tries to engage me in conversation and I respond with grunts and one-word answers until she gives up and retreats to her own corner of the house. I tell myself I'm protecting them from having to deal with my disability, but I know that's not entirely true. The real truth is that I'm protecting myself from their pity, from the careful way they would choose their words around me, from the inevitable awkwardness of being the broken thing in the room that everyone is trying not to stare at. Dr. Morrison, the VA counselor they assigned to me, would probably call this depression. She's mentioned it during our phone sessions, used clinical terms like adjustment disorder and post-traumatic stress and survivor's guilt. She wants me to come in for face-to-face appointments, wants me to join a support group for disabled veterans, wants me to engage with the world in ways that feel impossible right now. Isolation isn't healing, she told me during our last call. You're not giving yourself a chance to adapt, to learn new ways of connecting with the people who love you. I hung up on her, not out of anger exactly, but out of a kind of exhaustion that runs deeper than physical tiredness. I'm tired of people trying to fix me, tired of being someone's project, tired of the assumption that I should be grateful to be alive when some days I'm not sure I am. The messages keep coming though. Every day, multiple times a day. Sarah's voice filtered through that mechanical translator telling me about her world, about our world, about the life that continues to happen around me while I sit in this chair and listen. Saw a cardinal in the backyard today, made me think of your mom. She always said cardinals were good luck. The Hendersons next door are getting divorced. Makes me sad. They seem so happy. I love you. I know you're struggling, but I love you. I'm here when you're ready. That last message came on a Thursday in October, 6 months after I'd been home. I played it 3 times, listening to the robot voice, repeat those words with the same flat inflection it used for everything else. I love you. I know you're struggling, but I love you. I'm here when you're ready. I wanted to throw the phone across the room. I wanted to scream at her to stop, to leave me alone, to find someone who could love her back the way she deserved. Instead I sat there in my chair and cried for the first time since I'd been home. Not the angry tears of frustration I'd shed in the hospital, but something deeper and more helpless. The tears of a man who had lost more than his sight in that explosion. Winter came early that year. I could feel the change in the air, hear the difference in the way sound carried through the house when Sarah ran the heat. The messages continued, adapted to the season. First snow today. You would have wanted to go out and make a snowman. Hot chocolate weather, made some with those little marshmallows you like. I started having dreams where I could see again. Not memories exactly, but new scenes. Sarah at the kitchen table grating papers, her hair falling across her face the way it used to when she concentrated. The backyard after a snowfall, pristine and white. My own hands, steady and sure. Diffusing one more bomb, walking away from one more explosion. In these dreams, I was still the man I used to be. I would wake up in the darkness that had become my constant companion, and spend long minutes remembering where I was, who I was now. The contrast between the dream and reality was almost unbearable, and some mornings I considered not getting out of bed at all. But I did get up, because not getting up felt too much like giving up entirely, and I wasn't ready for that yet. I would make my way to the kitchen, feel around for the coffee maker Sarah had programmed the night before, and settle into my chair to wait for the first message of the day. Spring arrived with sounds I had never paid attention to before. Birds returning from wherever birds go in winter, the neighbor starting up his lawn mower for the first time in months, Sarah opening windows to let fresh air circulate through the house. The messages began to reflect the changing season. Daffodils are coming up by the mailbox, earlier than usual this year. Thinking about planting a garden. Remember how we talked about growing tomatoes? I did remember. It was one of those conversations married couples have about someday we'll grow our own vegetables, someday we'll travel to Ireland, someday we'll buy a bigger house. Someday had seemed infinite back then, full of possibilities we would get around to eventually. The anniversary of the explosion came and went without acknowledgement from either of us. Sarah's messages that day were shorter than usual, more quiet day at school. Spring break starts next week. Made spaghetti. Your plate is on the counter. Nothing about what this date meant. Nothing about the fact that exactly 1 year ago our lives had changed irrevocably. That night, lying in bed listening to Sarah's quiet breathing beside me, I thought about the man I had been before Afghanistan. He seemed like a stranger now, someone I had known a long time ago but had lost touch with. That man had been capable, sure of his place in the world. He had known how to make his wife laugh, how to fix things around the house, how to plan for a future that seemed secure and attainable. This man, the one lying in the darkness beside a woman he loved but could no longer reach, didn't know how to do any of those things anymore. The phone buzzed on the nightstand. A late message, the kind Sarah sometimes sent when she couldn't sleep. I reached for it carefully, not wanting to wake her, and listened to the familiar robotic voice deliver her words. I miss you. I know you're right here beside me, but I miss you. I miss us. I don't know how to help you, but I need you to know that I'm not going anywhere. We'll figure this out together somehow. I listened to the message 3 times before deleting it, the way I deleted all her messages after listening to them. I didn't want them cluttering up the phone, didn't want the evidence of her one-sided attempts to maintain our connection. But as I lay there afterward, I realized something had shifted. For the first time in months, I found myself wanting to respond. Not that night, I wasn't ready for that yet, but the seed of possibility had been planted, the idea that maybe, somehow, there could be a way back to each other. Summer arrived with longer days that I experienced as changes in temperature and different patterns of sound from the neighborhood. Children home from school, lawn mowers running more frequently, the ice cream truck that played its cheerful melody every afternoon at 3 o'clock. Sarah's messages reflected the season. Pool at the community center opens next week. Mrs. Chen called to invite us to their barbecue. Told her we'd think about it. Miss Chen, no relation despite the shared last name, lived 3 houses down and had been trying to include us in neighborhood gatherings ever since I'd been home. Sarah always declined politely, understanding without being told that I wasn't ready for that kind of social interaction. But something was changing in me, slowly and almost imperceptibly. The messages that had once felt suffocating now felt like lifelines, connections to a world I had withdrawn from but might someday rejoin. I began to pay closer attention to the details Sarah shared, to picture the scene she described, to imagine myself as part of them again. Saw the most beautiful sunset tonight, all orange and pink like watercolors bleeding together. I tried to visualize it, drawing on memories of other sunsets we had watched together. The Hendersons' divorce is final. Saw the moving truck today. I found myself wondering who had moved out, whether they had children, how people rebuilt their lives after something fell apart. The messages were becoming less about information and more about connection, Sarah's way of keeping me tethered to the world even when I couldn't fully participate in it. And slowly, without quite realizing it was happening, I began to feel less like a passive recipient of her words and more like a participant in an ongoing conversation, even if my side of it remained unspoken. August brought a heat wave that made the house feel stuffy and uncomfortable, even with the air conditioning running constantly. Sarah's messages reflected the weather, hottest day of the year so far. Even the dogs are hiding in the shade. Thinking about going to the lake this weekend. Remember how we used to go there when it got this hot? I did remember. We had discovered the lake during my first leave after basic training, a small quiet place about an hour's drive from the house where we could swim and picnic and pretend that the world was simpler than it actually was. We had talked about going back after I returned from my second deployment, but somehow we never got around to it. There was always something else that needed to be done, some other priority that took precedence. That evening, as I sat in my chair listening to the sounds of Sarah moving around the kitchen, I found myself thinking about the lake more specifically than I had thought about anything in months. I could almost feel the cool water, almost hear the sound of small waves lapping against the shore. For the first time since the explosion, I felt something that might have been desire, not just for the lake but for the possibility of being someone who could go to a lake again. The feeling was so unexpected that it almost frightened me. I had gotten used to the numbness, the careful emotional distance I maintained from everything and everyone. Wanting something felt dangerous, like opening myself up to disappointment or worse, hope. But the feeling persisted, and over the following days I found myself thinking more and more about the life that existed beyond this chair, this house, this careful routine of survival I had constructed. Sarah's messages began to feel less like reports from a distant world and more like invitations to rejoin the one I had left behind. First day of school tomorrow always makes me nervous and excited at the same time. New student in my class this year. His dad was deployed to Syria. Reminds me of the kids we used to talk about having someday. Children. Another someday conversation, another plan that had been put on indefinite hold when I came home broken. We had never talked about it directly, but I knew Sarah well enough to understand that having children with a disabled husband felt more complicated than it had when she was married to a whole one. Not impossible perhaps, but different in ways we were both still learning to navigate. September arrived with cooler temperatures and the particular quality of light that comes with shorter days. I couldn't see the changing leaves, but I could sense autumn in the way sound carried differently through the crisp air, in the smell of wood smoke from neighbors' fireplaces, in the rhythm of Sarah's morning routine as she prepared for a new school year. Her messages began to include more stories about her students, detailed accounts of their personalities and struggles and small triumphs. Tommy read his first complete sentence today. You should have seen his face light up. Maria's parents are getting divorced. She's been acting out, but I think she just needs extra attention right now. I realized that Sarah was sharing these stories not just to fill the silence between us, but because she knew I would understand. Before my deployments, I had been the one she talked to about work, the one who listened to her concerns about difficult students and celebrated her successes with the ones who made breakthroughs. These messages were her way of continuing those conversations, even if they had become monologues. October brought the anniversary of Sarah's first text message to me. A year of daily messages, hundreds of small communications that I had received but never answered. As the date approached, I found myself wondering if she would acknowledge it, if she even remembered when she had started this ritual of reaching out to a husband who never reached back. She didn't mention it directly, but something in her messages that week felt different, more intentional. Been thinking about communication lately, how many different ways there are to say I love you without actually saying the words. Sometimes the most important conversations happen without talking at all. I understood what she was telling me, and for the first time I felt the full weight of what she had been doing all these months. Every message had been an act of faith, a declaration that our marriage still existed even when I couldn't participate in it. Every day she had chosen to reach out, to maintain the connection between us, to believe that someday I might be ready to reach back. That night, lying in bed beside her, I made a decision that surprised me with its clarity. I was going to respond. Not that night, not the next day, but soon. I was going to find a way to rejoin the conversation she had been having with herself on my behalf for almost a year. The opportunity came the following week, on a Tuesday afternoon when my phone buzzed with an unusually long message. Been thinking about the lake a lot lately. about how peaceful it was there, how we used to talk about all the places we wanted to visit together. I know things are different now, but I still want to visit those places with you. Different doesn't have to mean impossible. I love you, Marcus. I've loved you through 2 deployments, and I love you through this. We'll figure out how to be us again, whatever that looks like. I listened to the message twice, then sat for a long time thinking about what I wanted to say in response. The text-to-speech function on my phone could type out words as I spoke them, but I had never tried to use it for anything more than basic commands. The idea of composing a message, of choosing words that would carry the weight of everything I had been feeling for the past year, felt overwhelming. But I had to try. I picked up the phone and activated the voice-to-text function. My first attempt was clumsy, full of false starts and corrections that the software couldn't interpret properly. The second attempt was better, but still didn't capture what I wanted to say. It took me almost an hour to compose a simple message. I love you too. I'm not ready for the lake yet, but maybe someday soon. Thank you for not giving up on us. I stared at the phone for another 10 minutes before pressing send, my finger hovering over the button, as I questioned whether I was ready to break the silence that had defined our relationship for so long. Finally I pressed it, and immediately felt a mixture of relief and terror at what I had done. Sarah's response came within minutes, and when I played it back, I could hear something different in the robot voice. Not emotion exactly, but an energy that hadn't been there before. You responded. I can't believe you responded. I've been hoping for so long. We don't have to rush anything. We have all the time in the world to figure this out together. That night, at dinner, Sarah and I had our first real conversation in months. Not the careful small talk we had occasionally exchanged, but an actual discussion about how we were both feeling, what we both needed, how we might begin to rebuild what we had lost. It was awkward and tentative, full of long pauses and careful word choices, but it was a beginning. Over the following weeks, our text conversations became more frequent and more natural. I discovered that I actually preferred this form of communication to face-to-face conversation. It gave me time to consider my words, to express myself without worrying about body language or facial expressions I couldn't see or control. For the first time since coming home, I felt like I could be eloquent again, thoughtful in ways that felt more like my old self. Sarah seemed to understand instinctively that this was easier for me than talking, and she began to send even more messages throughout the day, creating a running dialogue that filled the spaces between our spoken interactions. We talked about everything: her work, my ongoing physical therapy, the dreams we had both been having, the fears we had both been carrying. I was afraid you didn't love me anymore, she wrote one evening. I was afraid the explosion had changed that too. I was afraid you only stayed out of obligation, I wrote back. I was afraid I had become just another thing you had to take care of. You're not a thing to take care of, you're my husband. There's a difference. November arrived with the first serious cold snap of the year, and Sarah's messages began to include details about preparing the house for winter. Brought in the patio furniture today. Crazy how summer went so fast. Thinking about Thanksgiving. Your mom called to invite us to dinner. What do you think? Thanksgiving. Another milestone I wasn't sure I was ready for, another test of my ability to navigate social situations as the person I had become rather than the person I used to be. But Sarah's question felt different from the invitations I had been declining all year. This felt like a genuine consultation rather than a careful attempt to include me in something she assumed I couldn't handle. I think I'd like to try, I wrote back. But maybe we could leave early if it gets too overwhelming. Of course, we'll take it one step at a time. Everything one step at a time. Thanksgiving dinner was awkward but not impossible. My mother had clearly been coached by Sarah about what to expect, and the conversation was careful but genuine. My nephew asked direct questions about being blind the adults had been too polite to voice, and I found myself answering honestly rather than deflecting. It wasn't comfortable exactly, but it was real in a way that felt like progress. The drive home was quiet, both of us processing what had just happened. Finally Sarah spoke. You did great today. I know that wasn't easy. It wasn't as hard as I thought it would be, I said, and realized as I said it that it was true. Maybe we could do it again sometime. December brought the longest nights of the year, but instead of feeling oppressive, the darkness felt less lonely than it had in months. Sarah and I had developed a rhythm of communication that felt natural and sustainable. Texts throughout the day, conversations over dinner, the comfortable silence of two people learning to be married to each other again. Christmas was approaching, and for the first time since I'd been home, I found myself thinking about gifts I might give, rather than obligations I wanted to avoid. Sarah had been carrying so much of the emotional labor of our relationship for so long, and I wanted to find a way to acknowledge that, to give her something that would show her how much her persistence had meant to me. The idea came to me gradually, built from months of listening to her messages and recognizing the love that had sustained them. I wanted to give her something that honored the conversation she had been having with me, even when I couldn't participate in it. Working with the VA counselor I had reconnected with, I learned to use voice recording software on my phone. It took several attempts to get comfortable with the technology, but eventually I was able to record messages of my own, not responses to individual texts, but longer reflections on what her daily communications had meant to me during the darkest period of my life. I recorded messages about specific texts that had particularly moved me, about the way her voice had kept me connected to the world even when I couldn't engage with it directly, about the faith she had shown in continuing to reach out even when I couldn't reach back. I recorded messages about my love for her, about my gratitude for her patience, about my hopes for who we might become together as we learn to navigate this new version of our marriage. By Christmas Eve, I had compiled almost 3 hours of recordings. I had Sarah's sister help me organize them chronologically and transfer them to a device Sarah could listen to whenever she wanted. My own daily messages to her, a year's worth of responses to the conversation she had been carrying on by herself. I gave it to her on Christmas morning, along with an explanation of what it was, and a request that she listen to it when she was ready, not because she had to, but because I wanted her to understand how much her words had meant to me even when I couldn't say so. She cried when I explained what the gift was, and I cried too, both of us finally able to acknowledge the depth of what we had been going through and the strength it had taken to get through it together. That night, Sarah listened to the entire recording while I lay beside her in bed. I could tell when she was crying, could hear her breath catch at certain passages, could feel the movement of the mattress when she turned to look at me, even though I couldn't see her looking. When it was over, she was quiet for a long time. Finally she spoke, her voice soft in the darkness. "I had no idea you were listening so carefully. I thought maybe the messages were just disappearing into the void." "They weren't," I said. "They were the opposite of void. They were the thing that kept me tethered when I wanted to float away entirely." "I love you," she said, words I had heard in robotic text-to-speech voices hundreds of times, but which sounded entirely different in her actual voice. "I love who you were, and I love who you are now, and I love who we're becoming together." "I love you too," I said, and meant it in ways I was only beginning to understand. We made love that night for the first time since I'd been home, tentatively and carefully, learning each other's bodies again in the darkness that had become my permanent landscape. It was different from how we had been together before, more conscious, more deliberate, full of questions asked and answered through touch rather than sight. But it was also deeper somehow, more intentional, grounded in an understanding of each other that we had earned through months of patient communication. Afterward, lying together in the quiet darkness, I realized that something fundamental had shifted. I was still blind, still disabled, still learning how to navigate a world I could no longer see. But I was no longer alone in that navigation, no longer carrying the weight of my limitations as a private burden. Sarah and I had found a way to be married to each other again, different from how we had been before, but no less real, no less committed to the future we were building together. The text messages continued, but they were part of a larger conversation now rather than a monologue sustained by faith. We both sent them throughout the day, sharing observations and thoughts and reminders of love. The robotic voice still read them to me, but now I could hear Sarah's actual voice underneath it, could picture her face as she typed the words, could respond with words of my own that carried my voice to her in return. Spring came early that year, and with it a sense of renewal that felt earned rather than imposed. Sarah and I began making plans, small ones at first, then gradually larger ones. We talked about the lake, about the garden she wanted to plant, about the possibility of having children in this new life we were creating together. None of it was certain, but all of it was possible, and possibility felt like enough. On the anniversary of my last day of sight, Sarah and I drove to the lake for the first time since before my deployment. I couldn't see the water or the changing leaves, or the way the light fell across the surface in patterns I remembered from years before. But I could feel the sun on my face, and hear the small waves against the shore, and smell the particular scent of water and trees and earth that meant peace to me. We spread a blanket on the grass and ate sandwiches, and talked about everything and nothing. Sarah described what she could see, the families with small children, the teenagers jumping off the dock, the way the late afternoon light made everything look golden. I listened and tried to picture it, but more than that, I simply felt grateful to be there, to be part of the world again in however limited a way. As the sun began to set, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message. Without thinking, she handed it to me, and I activated the text-to-speech function to hear what it said. It was from her sister, asking how our day at the lake was going. "Good," I dictated back to the phone. "Really good, we should do this more often." Sarah laughed, a sound I realized I had missed even more than I had known. "We should," she agreed. "We have a lot of time to make up for." Driving home as darkness fell around us, I thought about the year that had just passed, about the long journey from silence to communication to connection. I thought about the messages Sarah had sent every day, even when I couldn't respond, about the faith it had taken to keep reaching out across the distance I had created between us. I thought about the conversation we were still having, would always be having, about love and loss, and the daily work of staying married to each other through whatever came next. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah, even though she was sitting right beside me in the car. I played it back through the speakers so we could both hear it. "Thank you for today. Thank you for coming back to me. Thank you for letting me love you through everything." I picked up the phone and dictated a response. "Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for showing me that love doesn't have to be perfect to be real. Thank you for teaching me how to hear your voice even when I can't see your face." The robotic voice read the message back to us in its flat mechanical tone, but somehow it carried all the warmth and emotion we had put into it. We drove the rest of the way home in comfortable silence, two people who had learned to communicate across the darkness, who had found their way back to each other one message at a time. The future stretched ahead of us, uncertain but no longer frightening. We would face it together, Sarah and I, sending messages back and forth across whatever distances life created between us, always listening for the sound of each other's voices in whatever form they took. In the end, that was what marriage was. Not the promise that nothing would ever change, but the commitment to keep talking to each other no matter how much change came, to keep reaching out even when reaching back seemed impossible. The phone buzzed one more time, as we pulled into our driveway. Sarah's final message of the day: "I love you. See you in the morning." "I love you too," I wrote back. "I'll be listening."